up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net and FITE.tv. I am your host, as always, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino, and we've got plenty to discuss today. Going to get into some deep conversations about some of the stars that are obviously coming back for these one-off mega events, and maybe some fans criticizing the utilization of those, and of course the inability, at least in their minds, of WWE being able to create new big stars, kind of at the expense of people like Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Triple H. We're going to discuss all of that here on The Voice of Wrestling. We appreciate you joining us. Nick, what's up, man?
Not too much. We are counting down the days to WWE Super Showdown, which means we're counting down the days to WWE Evolution, which means we're counting down the days to WWE Crown Jewel. I think all three of those events take place within the next 5 hours.
Right.
And then it's like, what? Royal Rumbles after that? I can't keep track of all these pay-per-views. We are counting down the days to numerous WWE events that are going to be coming up in the next month. And I think that's going to sort of play into some of the discussion that we had on the show today, how crowded the WWE pay-per-view space is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, the network is kind of the primary reason for this. WWE now has free range to do any show they want, anytime they want. And of course, it kind of, these big shows now, we view them as the traditional pay-per-views of 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And WWE doesn't have any restraints as far as when they can air these, what type of shows they can be, obviously at what time. It's no longer Sunday evenings. It can be done literally at 5 a.m. in the morning for us here domestically. We'll run down the Australia show coming up this Saturday, is it this Saturday, Nick? Is that when it's supposed to be?
It's going to be this Saturday, bright and early in the morning. So for anybody who's confused, it's going to actually be very early Saturday morning. WWE had actually sent out an email suggesting Sunday, but that's because it will be airing on Sunday in Australia.
Right.
But that's actually Saturday morning. So when you go to bed this Friday night, if you wake up at 5 a.m. Saturday morning, that's when the show will be airing. That's 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Well, let's kind of get into some of these complaints that WWE fans have been voicing over the past several weeks in this week's main event. It's the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. Chris Cash, Nick Paglino. And Nick, look, Shawn Michaels, we have to start off with the obvious physical trait, which I saw a meme or some sort of photo on social media this week with the double choke slam, and I swear I could not tell. It was from behind of Triple H and Shawn Michaels. I could not tell which was which. Shawn Michaels has cut his hair and looks really weird. But beyond that, Nick, the idea of Shawn Michaels, and I know we have several different ways we kind of want to take this discussion, but let's start off with something that a lot of people are kind of talking about in general, as far as WWE's maybe inability to create new stars, and it's coming at the expense of guys like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, Triple H and Kane. There's others that you can throw into. We've got the SmackDown show, big mega show coming up here in just a couple of weeks as well, where they're talking about Batista coming back, and there's a number of big names that we would consider mega stars, Nick. And the fact that this is the first time that I remember, at least, us ever having a situation where literally 3 big events are being marketed and promoted at the same time. And obviously you've got this coming up, Super Showdown, and then followed by Evolution, and then of course the next Saudi Arabia show that's going to be massive in its own right. And Nick, let's kind of start the stage by discussing maybe the pros and cons of that reality that we live in now, in part because of WWE's freedom with their own distribution channel in the WWE network. And that'll kind of lead us down the road of how it might be affecting WWE's creative, whether it should be, whether there's room for all these shows, and of course the creativity to still flow the way WWE fans apparently want them to. We'll get into all of that, but let's start with the idea that this is really a unique period for wrestling fans and WWE alike, in that we do have three events, three actual, again, what you can kind of look at in the same way that we used to view the traditional pay-per-views, like something they're using their Raw and SmackDowns and free televised events to push over a period of time. We have three of those all at one time right now. And so it's kind of interesting. And do you see any pitfalls or negatives, Nick, or bottlenecks or anything? Has anything been that evident to you as far as kind of, again, just the fact that they're so inundated with big events they have to obviously market?
Well, yeah, I think one of the issues is, getting everybody on these shows, and really they have such a distinct flavor to them. You have the Super Showdown pay-per-view, which is taking place in Australia live, which means it's going to be airing at 5:00 in the morning. So the approach there is very different. You have the WWE Evolution pay-per-view, which is an all-women's pay-per-view. So that obviously is going to detour from all of the WWE television storylines because it's going to focus only on the women. Then you have the WWE Crown Jewel event, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia, and that has its own demands and its own audience. And as we've been talking about, people from the country and higher ups and people who are in the General Sports Authority in Saudi Arabia demanding certain wrestlers. I'm not even sure if we talked about it on this show. I know you and I talked about it certainly off the air, but when WWE did the first Greatest Royal Rumble show in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, the General Sports Authority actually asked for Yokozuna and the Ultimate Warrior to be at the show.
Right.
Now, that to me is really a case of booking the old guys over the young guys. I mean, if you have to start exhuming wrestlers,
right,
because you can't create new stars, you got a big problem.
Right.
But no, here's the idea. You look at the ways you're being pushed and pulled depending on where you're doing the show. It's not like you're doing three shows. One's in Baltimore, one's in Chicago, and one's in Minneapolis. These are taking place all around the world,
right,
with one of the pay-per-views focusing only on the women's division.
Yep.
So yes, this is going to dictate how WWE tells the stories. And in the case of Shawn Michaels, which, I know we're going to focus on a lot here in the main event segment today, it's all about Saudi Arabia, baby. And this show coming up on Saturday, I believe, is just a precursor. It's just a stepping stone to eventually what WWE is trying to get at the Crown Jewel event. So if Crown Jewel was not going to happen, if Saudi Arabia was not going to happen, I feel fully convinced that Shawn Michaels wouldn't even be in the mix at the WWE Super Showdown pay-per-view that's taking place this Saturday. So it crowds the space unbelievably. And, you and I have a difficult time just keeping up with, what show's on Saturday? What show's next week?
Right.
I'm sure a lot of fans, casual fans, have got to be in that same situation. But this is also dictating the way WWE books based on different audiences, different desires from the country that they're going to be in. And that makes it really difficult for overall booking of shows. I mean, we have a Super Showdown pay-per-view that's taking place on Saturday in which Ronda Rousey is teaming up with the Bella Twins. And we're trying to figure out how do we get to WWE Evolution, which by all accounts is going to showcase Ronda Rousey versus Nikki Bella. So there's a lot of, I think, confusion amongst the fans.
Right.
And that's probably coming from the fact that there's that same confusion within WWE as to how do we satisfy all parties for these shows that we have coming up.
No, I agree with you. And I think WWE's or the WWE fans critique of maybe WWE's lack of superstardom this day and age, and kind of clearly the focus recently has been on the Super Showdown event, and it feels beyond, because it's not as if their main stars, today's stars are not on this event, are on this card as well. But it feels like it's more than just because it's the next event coming up. You've got the Saudi Arabia show with the triple threat. Obviously, that feels like it's going to eventually be a pretty big deal for kind of the progression of Braun Strowman and Roman Reigns, at least, and then even Brock Lesnar and whatever new deal he may or may not have at this point going forward. But it definitely feels like right now we've everything promotional wise, the packages and stuff, which I think have been very, very good. I mean, it really does feel, and I don't know if you and I even agree on this point, Nick, but it does to me feel like a pretty big event that's going down this weekend. And I think WWE's done a very, very good job of that. But as we kind of start singling in on Shawn Michaels, I think it kind of gives us a better high altitude look at some of the issues that I think WWE is having right now. And, looking at Shawn Michaels and his, and I'm kind of with you. I think if it wasn't for Saudi Arabia, for all the negatives that kind of come with WWE's involvement in that, ass backwards country, I think it's a look at, if it wasn't for them, Shawn Michaels would not be probably even considering a return to the ring, or maybe not. Maybe considering he would be, but a realistic fact that he might come back probably really wouldn't be quite as close or as or possible or feasible at this point. But when Shawn Michaels looks at his options of how he wants to come back, creatively and against who and for what purpose, I find a real problem with the fact that it's going to not only be kind of a starter match with a tag team matchup between him and Triple H against the Brothers of Destruction. However, like that's one thing. But then when it seems not necessarily inevitable, Nick, but it certainly seems to be indicating that we might go a step further and get a singles match with Shawn Michaels, another match during this return of some kind with The Undertaker alone. And I don't know where you stand. So before I give my opinion, Nick, I want to kind of find out if we're even on the same page here. Is that the direction, for whatever reason, is that the direction you want to see Shawn Michaels go with his return? And then further, is it something that you believe the majority of fans maybe want to see Shawn Michaels do? I mean, is that a matchup that you think the majority, and let's talk casual, I mean, all of it, encompassed here, not just the internet fans that definitely want to see Daniel Bryan or AJ Styles and Shawn Michaels, but just the casual fans at home. Is that a good use of Shawn Michaels' return versus him sucking it up physically or whatever his issues might be, and giving the fans what I ultimately think they truly want, which would be a new, fresh matchup with someone obviously like an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan?
Well, it's a good matchup, HBK versus The Undertaker, but it's by no means the best matchup. So I think you and I are going to potentially somewhat agree on this subject, but maybe not entirely. Will the fans want to see HBK versus The Undertaker? Look, for a one-off, HBK coming out of retirement, we haven't seen him in the ring in 8 years. The fans, I would be interested in seeing him wrestle an asparagus. The fans are going to buy into HBK wrestling anyone. And, by all accounts, it looks like it's going to be HBK teaming up with Triple H to take on Undertaker and Kane. So that actual first match back will be a tag team match. I think the fans are probably initially going to be thirsty just to see Shawn Michaels back in a ring. So, yes, there is going to be a certain amount of appeal there, just like there is a certain amount of appeal in seeing Triple H versus The Undertaker. That might not be the match that you and I personally would book to headline a show like WWE Super Showdown. But let's face it, coming out of Raw this week, that is the main event this Saturday at WWE Super Showdown. It's not any of the younger guys. It's not any of the established talent. It is The Undertaker versus Triple H. So I think the casual fan, to a very certain extent, is going to want to see it. Is the better option for HBK to face a Daniel Bryan or an AJ Styles or someone who is leaning towards more being the future of WWE? And what's funny, as much as people clamor for the AJ Styles match or for the Daniel Bryan match, do you really consider AJ Styles and Daniel Bryan the future of WWE? I consider them the short-term future of WWE, the present of WWE. I don't know how much longer an AJ Styles has. I don't know how much longer a Daniel Bryan has.
Right.
At the top at least. You talk about the Kevin Owenses, the Eliases, maybe even a guy like a Bobby Lashley because, he has been gone from WWE for so long. You look at the younger guys that have come up. That to me, the Finn Balor's, that's the real future of WWE. So the NXT guys, a Johnny Gargano, a Tommaso Ciampa, I've been arguing that I'd love to see HBK face one of those guys. That's the future of WWE to me. In any case, even an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan match would be better suited for WWE than the Undertaker match. But I don't think you're going to see it because of two reasons. And number one, I'm going to go back to the point I made before, and I want to remind everyone that the joke I made about Yokozuna and Ultimate Warrior, that is not a joke. That is 100% real. And it's important to remember that the Saudi Arabian General Sports Authority asked for Yokozuna and Ultimate Warrior to be at that show because it tells you the limited knowledge they have of WWE's product. And it tells you how dated they are with WWE's product, which is probably a very good indication as to why at Crown Jewel we will see Triple H, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Kane, because those are the guys that Saudi Arabia associates with top stars in WWE, probably because they're not as up to date on the current product. It's one of the reasons why we saw The Undertaker at the first Saudi Arabia show. It's why we saw some of those older names. It's why we saw the John Cena versus Triple H match, because those are the guys that they feel are the top stars in WWE. So if the end game here is WWE Crown Jewel, and we know that the Saudi Arabian General Sports Authority, the people who are fitting the bill for this show, are older school fans, it makes all the sense in the world to have that tag team match. Now, looking beyond WWE Crown Jewel, what will happen after that? Will Shawn Michaels have that rumored singles match, and who will it be against? Will it be against The Undertaker? Well, I think the reason why that will be up against someone like The Undertaker is simply because of things that Shawn Michaels has said in the past about where he's at physically.
Right.
And this idea that, and Chris, we touched on this a little bit briefly in the past on this show, but I think you and I still sort of don't see eye to eye on the angle from which HBK is coming here. I think you tend to think, and I would agree with you to a certain point, that He can have a great match with an AJ Styles. He can have a great match with a Daniel Bryan, even if he's limited in the ring, even if he's not doing the moonsaults and the flying elbows and everything that he's known for, and even if he's not Mr. WrestleMania. He can tell a great story with a guy like an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan. But from everything I've heard him say, I really feel like it's a point of pride. It's a point of, it's coming from a place of ego from Shawn Michaels. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not saying he's being some egotistical prick. I'm simply saying I think it's tough getting old. I mean, you mentioned his hair on Raw this week. Do you think that's not something that he wasn't considering going out there? And listen, he knew he was going to take the choke slam.
Right.
If he takes the choke slam, the hat's
coming off. Yeah.
If the hat flies off, you're going to see the bald spot. I know many men that have shaved the head because they would rather have the shaved head over the bald spot. It is a matter of, I don't want to show my age. I look younger if I just shave the head as opposed to having the bald spot. Triple H did the same thing years ago when he shaved the head clean. You know, they're in a cosmetic business. They're in a business where your look and the way you look means a lot. And the bottom line here, and again, like I said, I don't fault HBK. When you put old HBK up against younger AJ Styles or younger Daniel Bryan, HBK looks that much older. When you put HBK next to old Undertaker, suddenly HBK doesn't look as old anymore. And I honestly think that's why he probably asked for that singles match. As for the reason why he is getting back into the ring, if he does, or he's even going to be at Australia, bottom line is because of the truckload of money he's going to get to appear at Saudi Arabia. If he gets back into the ring, it's because of the truckload of money he is getting at Saudi Arabia. Now, as for who he faces or who he might face after that, that's probably where I think he steps in and says, all right, well, now wait a minute. Now, I'm going to speak up and I'm going to tell you what I want. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to take the money and I'm going to do this, I'm doing this up against a guy like Undertaker because that's who I feel comfortable working with in the ring, because the bottom line is I'm not a young man anymore.
I think, and while I completely understand, the factors that are probably going into his decision on coming back in the first place and who he's going to wrestle and why he wouldn't wrestle this guy or that guy, you know, I look at it kind of differently too. Yes, it's the money, and I would never fault anybody or blame anybody for coming back for the amount of money that he's clearly getting, especially for the Saudi Arabia show. That's likely going to be when he actually returns in the ring. But I think that, you know, as much as pride is a factor, and ego and all of that, you would think though. It's been 7-8 years that he's been able to pass up on all of these opportunities and chances to come back and do something meaningful for the business. It really does start at that point showing, because I think pride and ego can be overcome. You know, I really do. Especially, I mean, it's almost contradictory in and of itself in the sense that, you know, kind of ego begets ego in a sense, where it's like, yes, maybe you could argue that his ego is what's going to prevent him from trying to step in a ring with someone like an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan, but it's also his ego that would make him try. And if he's going to get in and take the bumps already, it's like, I'm not a wrestler, and I'm not going to, it'd be nice to have someone on that can kind of explain this at some point, as far as what the difference really could be for someone in Shawn Michaels' position of wrestling a guy like The Undertaker. Because trust is a part of that, but let's take the fact, like, let's just take that at face value. And in the sense, I doubt that Shawn Michaels thinks someone like AJ Styles or Daniel Bryan is going to kill him in the ring because of their, their mistakes or whatever. I feel like, take that out of it. It's, I know there are reasons and justifiable reasons. I just don't know. I'm curious to really what extreme to the other, those are. And is it something that Shawn Michaels could realistically do? Because to me, his ego would then, step up and be like, I want, if I'm going to put my body through this, to go out there and do this one last time in this type of setting with this particular guy that he knows he won't be able to get anywhere close, most likely, to that type of match with the Undertaker. It could be great storytelling, but it's going to be a far cry from what we remember from the two of them, and that's evident just by the Undertaker's recent matches, big time matches at like WrestleMania for the past few years. But going one step further, then, if you think that there is a chance, which I really do, he has kept himself in shape. He's there. He's older and he's definitely run down more than he was. But I think he can get himself there mentally and physically to think I could do one big match with this guy and let him do most of the work. And me, again, I'm not a wrestler, so I won't go there. But then it's the meaning side of it. It's the consequence of it all, Nick. It really starts boiling down to there is no other reason besides the money. And when you hear him in the interviews and stuff recently, Nick, he starts citing things like the fans and what they want and doing it more for them. And I saw one of the recent interview that you linked me to, actually, Nick, that little short 4 or 5 minute clip with the guy where he was doing, I don't know what it was, but it was like somewhere overseas, and he sat down on stage.
Yeah, he was in Glasgow, and he was talking with Inside the Ropes. I mean, this was earlier this year.
Okay, so I saw that, and he talked about, hey, as it relates to an AJ Styles, it's nice to know that the fans still think that, hey, maybe I could do that, and everything. Well, or that maybe they would be interested in that, I think is what he said. It's a portion of fans that would be interested in that.
Right.
The majority of fans would be interested in that.
I think it's a similar meaning, and I think it's important to stress too that people, if someone said to me, let's match up AJ Styles against Hulk Hogan.
Right.
Are people going to want to see that match? I think they're going to think to themselves, there's just no way he could hang there. So I think HBK is also trying to say, hey, look, it's flattering that people think I can have this match.
Sure.
That I can really hang with a guy like an AJ Styles because, let's face it, HBK has kept himself in good shape every time we see him on television. I think that's leading people to believe that he really could hold his own in a match against an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan.
Well, and I think, again, then it comes down to like what bigger purpose, if he's going to put his body through this, again, what bigger purpose beyond the money and doing it with an old friend or whatever the case may be that you could look at and attribute to his return, what bigger purpose is going into these decisions? And I think that at that point, it's like, if there is any way, should he go on and have another match beyond the tag team match that's all but inevitable at this point at Saudi Arabia, it's like you don't owe it. I hate that phrase. I hate the idea that he owes anything to
no,
fans.
Of course not.
But I do feel like it's like for him to be such a fundamentalist, at this point in his career for the wrestling business and how it goes round and round and round. And kind of getting back to our initial discussion, Nick, about why fans might be a little angry and criticize WWE because of their inability to create new stars. Well, if you're going to put down a mathematical equation to the best of your ability of how you create new stars, these are the types of situations that factor into that, Nick. A guy like AJ Styles getting the torch passed to him, so to speak, from someone like Shawn Michaels. It benefits nobody at this point for Shawn Michaels to face The Undertaker in any capacity, especially in a one-on-one, big-time, high-profiled matchup. It really does not benefit anyone, with a very small, maybe exception to the fact that you could say, there's going to be a lot of new fans or new old fans, coming back watching this show, and they'll be introduced to all these new stars. You could make that argument. It's like the Tiger Woods argument, Nick, where Tiger being on TV, even though it's all about him, it's still introducing, people to the new golfers that are very, very good and deserve the recognition. So yes, there's
Well,
that
it was
argument.
it was like the WCW model of, taking the Hulk Hogan's and the Stings and the Macho Mans and the Lex Lugers and putting them on television,
Right.
because they're the draw,
Sure.
and people are going to tune in to watch them. And as they're watching it, they're going to say, "Oh, look,
Hey, who's this
what is
Jericho
this?
guy?
Cruiserweights?
Yeah,
Who's
exactly.
This Chris Jericho guy?
Right.
Who's this Chris Benoit? Who's this Rey Mysterio?"
There is that argument.
These new guys, and it worked. Trust me.
But yes, it works to a certain extent. It does not make uber megastars. It doesn't. No. It does not work to that degree. And so that's my point. It's like for someone like Shawn Michaels to take the risk and get himself out of bed to come be physical in the way you have to be physical to put on a pro wrestling match, an entertaining and a good one at that, which he's going to expect nothing less of himself. It's like when you get to that point, then you start thinking of kind of what am I doing with this at this point? Yes, it's the money, but what am I truly trying to accomplish here? And it just seems like someone like Shawn Michaels would be more of a fundamentalist and take that approach and say, I want this opportunity. Yes, I'm going to put my body through hell, but I want this opportunity, and I'm going to take this opportunity because it'll be the last one I have to help fulfill my legacy and help create maybe somebody else's future. And I think that's why I lean toward really hoping, not that I'm not going to go out of my way to watch Shawn Michaels matches, no matter what it is, when it is at this point, but because he's absolutely my all-time favorite. I just think that, man, it would be nice in a day and age where it is very difficult to create superstars, for a lot of reasons that we'll get into a little bit here before we kind of start running down some of the other news of the week and run down the card for this Saturday. I just feel like because it's so difficult to do, Nick, you've got to take advantage of these once in a lifetime kind of opportunities, such as Shawn Michaels' return, as limited as it's going to be. Give him that opportunity, and hopefully he wants to seize that opportunity. So I'm not giving up hope here, Nick, that they decide, or that Shawn Michaels decides specifically to maybe go in a different direction for a WrestleMania match next year or something. Like, hopefully his body gets in there, in the tag match where he can be a little bit protected, but he comes out of it feeling like I can go much further than that. Not that he will, but like I know I can handle, with a little bit of training and stuff, I can handle AJ Styles. It might be a little different match than it would have been 10 years ago, but it still will be better than the alternative, even Undertaker at this point. Hey,
and to help fuel your hope here, an Undertaker match could also be a test match.
Well, true.
We don't
know how long we have with him.
He gets in the ring, he has the tag match at Crown Jewel. He sees how he feels. He decides, I want the singles match. Maybe they do the singles match at Survivor Series in November. He does the Survivor Series match and says, I felt great. That felt better than I thought it would feel. I feel like I could go maybe harder. I could probably work faster. I could work stronger. I could work stiffer. And then maybe he does ask for that WrestleMania match against a younger star, against an AJ Styles, a Daniel Bryan, a Samoa Joe, a Finn Balor. So I don't necessarily think that, let's remember, if the Undertaker match does happen, it doesn't necessarily mean he can't do anything after that, So, maybe that could act as a test match to see how he feels, and you could get something else down the line at a WrestleMania should the match with Undertaker go well.
Let's kind of change gears a little bit but stay on the subject, Nick, that I think a lot of fans and that are talking about as far as WWE, and zone in a little bit or zoom in a little bit more on what it is today that makes it maybe more difficult, if that's the case. I mean, maybe it's not difficult to create a superstar this day and age. But one thing that I think on WWE side anyway, Nick, one thing that I think that fans seem to forget is that time. And I think fans' patience are wearing thinner these days. Like they have shorter attention spans. That's kind of a known fact at this point. But unfortunately, time is what obviously is factored into a pretty it's pretty important and crucial and vital, in my opinion, as far as, the actual methodology behind creating a superstar, a megastar, let's say. Somebody that can headline a couple of pay-per-views is one thing. Becoming a John Cena or The Rock or, even a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels on maybe that second level, that's still, people didn't look at Shawn Michaels during his rise to the top and then his, subsequent stay there at the top. They still weren't looking at him in the same light. They didn't appreciate Shawn Michaels the way we appreciate Shawn Michaels now. Yes, they enjoyed him enough to pay tickets, to pay for the pay-per-views, to buy merchandise. That's just kind of, and that stuff is still going on as larger than ever as it did back then in a lot of ways. So obviously there's stars right now, Nick, take a guy like Roman Reigns, that we are not going to know what level he has reached until probably 5 years from now, right? 10 years from now. He's just on the cusp of what he's going to, his defining moments and time at the top. Like, we don't know that. And I think fans tend to forget that time is still a crucial piece of the puzzle here when you're talking about creating superstars. And I think fans, unfortunately, are part of the issue. They're kind of their own worst enemy in the sense that their attention spans are so poor these days that they jump off one bandwagon and on to the next so freaking fast that by their standards, there would never be any true megastars. I don't care who they claim they want this particular week or this particular month, the flavor of the ice cream argument here. Like, they're going to change their tune a month from now or 2 months from now. Somebody's going to come up through the ranks of NXT and you're going to think they're the next greatest thing since sliced bread. And let's please give them all the time. But then that's really where my criticism of WWE fans and my understanding on the WWE side, that's where it kind of stops, begins and stops. It's now you move to the fact that, look, regardless of those, factors, you should be able to do a better job. And Nick, if we were going to start a list here of people that WWE has almost given a chance to and has given some time to, over the past few years, but has never translated to real superstardom. It's kind of a take it or leave it. You could take them or leave them at this point in their career. It would be a country mile long in the sense that take a guy like Bobby Roode right now. Comes into the company, is given a better chance than I really expected, considering where he came from and everything. But now where is he? Floundering. He's the definition of stalling at this point in his career. And WWE really looks at the stuff that they're creating for him and Chad Gable, and they're like, hey, this is really, really good. When it's really, really not. Not that it's not believable or realistic, but Nick, when we were talking about the planning for tonight's show and everything, I brought up a word that I'm probably going to fixate on during this conversation, and it's consequential or consequence, in the sense that right now, 75% or more of the stuff WWE is putting on television is inconsequential. That's the main problem. Whereas 20 years ago, everybody had storylines that, not everybody, but a larger percentage of the people than do these days had at least stories, title runs or title pursuits, backstage vignettes, dynamic characters, and things that just, it felt this way anyway, Nick, especially looking back in hindsight, that they all had a little bit more substance in their creative journeys in pro wrestling. Is that just me with revisionist history, or is that true in your mind?
I think it's true. Bully Ray actually issued a tweet shortly after Raw. And I think he was responding to a fan that had posted a picture of, or maybe a video of the Dudley Boys putting Mae Young through a table.
Right.
And Bully Ray responded to it and said, this is when wrestling was not so PC. And there were great storylines, and he said everyone got over. And again, I don't want to turn this into an argument over of PG versus R-rated or MA. I don't want to go there. But
well, and hey, Bully Ray was very, very careful using those letters versus the alternative. I mean, he used PC
correct
when he could have used PG, and that's not what he meant. There's a clear distinction in his mind, and I'm and I know in where you're going with this, and I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah, you can. I've said this before a million times. You can tell great stories in a PG atmosphere.
Yes,
I will always understand from a business standpoint that appealing to the most people you can will always yield you the bigger bucks. You ask any wrestler. We've asked wrestlers before on this show. Why are fans seeking perhaps Ring of Honor or New Japan or other promotions outside of WWE? Because it's an edgier product. You just watched All In September. I mean, Joey Ryan had a penis parade. You're never going to see that on WWE television, and that's limiting. And the reason why that's limiting is because you might not have who are some of their big sponsors, the Snickers, the Sonic, Mountain Dew, these sponsors that they work with. KFC are not going to be sponsoring a dick parade, so on the one hand, there are certain things you can do, there are certain things you can't do, but at the end of the day, telling good stories does not have to be a PG or an R-rated thing. And again, going back to what Bully Ray said, he used the words PC, politically correct. We are living in a very sensitive time right now, where you have to be very careful in entertainment, what you put forth, what you say, what characters you use, because they can be taken the wrong way. I watched the first episode of the new version of Murphy Brown that just came out, and they made a joke about, he'd said to Murphy Brown, who was learning Twitter, be careful what you tweet. People have lost shows for things far worse. And, of course, in response to what happened with Roseanne and that show being canceled because of a tweet, we do live in that very sensitive climate right now where people have to be careful. And so I'm not necessarily thinking that Bully Ray was taking a shot at WWE and the WWE product. He might have been taking more of a shot at the time that we live in. And how maybe they're not allowed to do some of those things. If you put, how old was Mae Young then? 70-year-old woman through a table nowadays, who knows what kind of a response you're going to get. But that said, there are so many stars, your country mile long list that you want to put together. I would put Bray Wyatt at the absolute top of that list.
Right.
And again, is it because there are certain stories they can't tell? I don't know that that's very true. I mean, you've got stuff out there right now that's really pushing the envelope in a creative way. I do believe that WWE could be doing that as long as it's in a good, creative, artistic way. I think they could have gone much further with the Bray Wyatt family concept of, brainwashing people, maybe abducting them into their faction. I don't see why they couldn't get away with things like that. But yeah, it's a product of, I think, a lot of different factors that are going on, the climate and the time that we live in right now being one of them. But just the creativity and the fact that, like you said, you've got a 3-hour show here. If you combine that with SmackDown, you've got 5 hours of television in a week. And, how many hours in a 5-hour block?
Right.
Are that important or feel that important? Maybe 1 full hour, maybe 60 full minutes of 5 full hours of television really feel important at all? What are you doing here? There's got to be something you can do to really push those stars. And again, who are they really? Look at some of the most enjoyable stuff that's going on SmackDown right now. It's coming out of Randy Orton and Jeff Hardy, two veterans, two older superstars, two guys of the past, not of the future. I think we talked about this off the air. Samoa Joe and AJ Styles really feels like the only really significant new thing that's happening right now. I think Daniel Bryan and The Miz are doing some good stuff, but for the most part, yes, a lot of what we see and I think we see it more on Raw because it's a 3-hour show, but a lot of what we're seeing on Raw every week just feels absolutely inconsequential.
Right.
And and at the end of the day, that's WWE's fault.
For those of you that stuck around so far this long during our show, we do have a special treat coming up, and we're going to get to it right after we kind of take a look at this Saturday's event. But Chris Sabin, Nick had the opportunity to sit down with him just a handful of days ago and had a really good discussion. And we're going to be airing that in here just a few minutes, so please stick around for that. But in the meantime, Nick, let's talk about, I don't really so much think, because of kind of the inconsequential nature of at least a good portion of these shows, of this show coming up on Saturday, the Super Showdown event, that we need to necessarily run down every single match and discuss our thoughts on the winners versus losers. But I do think there is some substance here, without a question, And we've talked a lot about the Triple H and Shawn Michaels, versus, Triple H versus The Undertaker with, of course, Michaels and Kane's involvement. But let's kind of go down the list, and let's start off with, that way we can kind of make reference to something we haven't really seen in a long, long time, if ever. I don't recall, Nick, ever seeing the crowd react the way they did to Elias and Kevin Owens this week on Raw. Seattle is probably still booing them right now. It was incredible. It made it uncomfortable. It made it clearly difficult for Elias and Kevin to continue on and understand really where they should go with it. The WWE, because it was so not unprecedented, but unusual this day and age, they brought up the lights somewhat so you could see the visible reactions from the fans. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Of course, they're going to go on to take on Bobby Lashley and John Cena, and this is a good example, Nick, of something that's kind of it was a great segment on Raw, and of course, Kevin Owens and Elias. It's like, hey, Kevin's great working off of somebody. Elias is very good working off of somebody. So let's put these guys together because we don't have Sammy for Kevin, and we need something there. It's comedy gold. It's very good stuff. They're very good at what they do, and I love their segments. But this match itself is kind of inconsequential. I very much expect that probably Cena and Bobby come and mow them down in some form or fashion. Maybe it's somewhat of a competitive match, but I expect Lashley and John Cena to obviously go over here. And if I had my way, I would completely reverse that. I would love for Owens and Elias to get a good victory over these guys. But I think the fact that it was Kevin that got the win this week over Bobby, it was a pretty good indicator that that's probably not going to happen this Saturday. So, Nick, real quick, your thoughts on this match?
Yeah, again, I think this match is really sort of a microcosm of what this event is going to be,
right?
Which is probably going to be, it could be a very fun event. We could see some really good matchups. The card looks great, looks like a strong card. But I think given the fact that it is airing at 5 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, which means if you live on the West Coast, this show is airing at 2 o'clock in the morning. Which, I mean, I don't know, if you're still up partying from Friday night, you might watch the show at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure. But I feel like this match is sort of a representation of what this event will be, which is largely inconsequential. I don't know that I fully agree with you on Elias and Kevin Owens needing that win. I do like the fact that John Cena is getting in the ring with Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley is still that guy that, even though I think he's starting to trend upward a little bit because he's been paired up with Leo Rush, I still think, having him losing big matches is probably not in his favor right now, depending on where they go with the storyline with him and Leo Rush. He could lose some matches. Leo Rush could be there to sort of build him up, coach him up, be that, Mick to Bobby Lashley's Rocky character. If you want to go that route, you might. But I do think John Cena and Bobby Lashley, I think there is some value to them getting the win there. As far as John Cena being there, totally inconsequential. He'll hit his 6th move of doom that he was teasing before, and we won't see him in WWE for another few months. My prediction here, John Cena and Bobby Lashley. But just again, to touch briefly on Elias and Kevin Owens, here is a perfect example. And, Chris, when we have a little bit more time, maybe next week we can talk a little bit about this. I really would hope to bring Kevin Kelly onto the show and get his thoughts on this. But The Undertaker and Chris Jericho in separate interviews. With Chris Jericho, it was on his podcast. The Undertaker actually did a very rare out-of-character interview very recently, and they both stressed the importance of character over great matches in professional wrestling, and that one of the keys to longevity and really having a long, profitable career is creating a great character and connecting through character versus great wrestling matches. And I think Elias and Kevin Owens are two great examples of guys who are just phenomenal characters in WWE right now. Elias, I can't name a great match that guy has had, but he's getting himself over as a character, as a guy who is connecting with the crowd so much. And it's debatable. He brought up the Seattle Supersonics. I mean, you never know. Maybe another heel could have brought up the Seattle Supersonics and he would have gotten a similar reaction because that's just such a touchy subject in Seattle. Right. But I think it's a combination of the touchiness of that subject and Elias really pulling it off as well as he does, plus the addition of Kevin Owens being there. He's such a great heel. I mean, these are two guys that drew 6 straight minutes of incredible heat. And that is something that is extremely important. And you would think that WWE rewards that with bigger and better main event pushes, because ultimately I do think then winning big matches and having great matches then adds to that great character and sort of helps put that great character at the top and in the main event picture. But WWE doesn't seem fit to do that right now. They're still sort of pushing who they want as opposed to the guys who are sort of organically getting over as characters. That said, my prediction in this match on Saturday, John Cena and Bobby Lashley pick up the win.
So we know because of the triple threat or the 6-man tag team match with the Shield and Braun and Dolph and McIntyre, that the Universal Championship and the Intercontinental Championship and the Raw Tag Team Championships are not up for grabs, but most others are, with the Cruiserweight Championship, New Day, obviously defending the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. You've got AJ Styles and Samoa Joe in a no count, no disqualification match for the WWE Championship. Ronda Rousey is also not defending hers. But then you also have, Nick, Daniel Bryan and The Miz, which that's a single match to actually determine a number 1 contender. So there's kind of another consequential matchup going on there as well. And I think, I want to just kind of group those championship matches, and of course that one between The Miz and Daniel Bryan together, just to kind of open the floor and just see real quick as we run them down, which ones do you think are likely to change hands, if you do at all?
Personally, I don't see any titles changing hands here. We've been talking about the Samoa Joe win for so long now.
Right.
Does WWE pull the trigger on a Samoa Joe win at
this type of an event
in the morning,
right,
on
exactly.
a Saturday?
Right.
I don't know that I see that happening.
I
really don't know that. I think there's enough on this show that will be sort of maybe not necessarily newsworthy, but buzzworthy. There are reports that an angle could take place this Saturday in which Ronda Rousey and Nikki Bella set up their match at WWE Evolution. So you could see things like that happen if there's a turn, if maybe the Bella twins. I've been feeling the Bella twins turning heel for so long now. I mean, God, with this Brie Bella situation with Liv Morgan, where, Liv Morgan suffered the concussion and Brie Bella is just taking all of this heat on social media, which, again, that's a conversation for another time. Social media is just, it's a cesspool. It breeds negativity. It is a horrible place. As one of my friends once put it, social media is where the earth goes to throw up. I feel bad for someone like Brie Bella, who is a very, very, of course, prominent on social media, and she's taking a lot of what's happening is just horrible trolling, and it's just not. It's not fair because it's social media. It's not, to me, a representation of, how someone might react to her if they were there face to face.
Well, and I want to make sure everybody's aware, though, of you making that statement that, it might be something that you take a little carefully, because I do think you're probably still receiving royalties and residuals from WWE for the material they get to use on a regular basis of you marking out for Brie Bella when they returned or when she came back for the Rumble, correct?
It's the first time ever in the history of film or television where a background actor truly has emerged as the star of the show.
Right.
I think I have the most through line in Total Bellas and Total Divas than anyone else. Hey, we have Nick Foles to thank for that, because I'm wearing that jersey the entire time.
Right.
Hey, it could have been me wearing a Matt Stafford jersey that gets cemented in the history of forever on television.
That's a good point. But at least Nick Foles, right.
But nevertheless, I think what we saw kind of come out of that, the fact that the fans I think the Bella Twins just work as heels better. Anyway,
they do.
I definitely feel like a heel turn is in order. Nikki Bella would definitely be the heel going up against Ronda Rousey at WWE Evolution. So aside from seeing something like that, what we see in the Daniel Bryan-Miz match, that will be newsworthy. Of course, whatever happens in the main event, I expect that tag team match with, the singles match with Triple H versus The Undertaker, I imagine that'll be the main event. I think those will be your buzzworthy and newsworthy elements of the show. So I am predicting no title changes on this show.
Fair enough. I think the only thing that I would, and I'm not saying that I don't agree that it could go down that way. I hope it doesn't, for the reason that we mentioned, kind of talking earlier about the freedom WWE has with these events now. They can put them on all the time. Yes, this is a stacked card. The Saudi Arabia is going to be even more stacked. But there still needs to be consequence. There still needs to be relevance. There still needs to be a reason to go out of your way to watch these from a creative standpoint, a storyline standpoint. And I think this card seems to indicate, at least in my mind, that WWE wants it to be more like this than maybe the Saudi Arabia shows. And I think that it really seems to indicate that WWE is hopeful they can utilize events like this and still kind of maintain the order and the flow that we're accustomed to on a week-to-week basis, and with the more traditional pay-per-view events that they still have. I think that Samoa Joe, it's time for him to win. I think that's probably the only one. Maybe New Day could drop to Sheamus and Cesaro. I'm not going to necessarily predict that one. But I'm going to predict that Daniel Bryan goes on to beat The Miz in this particular matchup, since there is such consequence to it. I like the fact they gave Miz that first win. I think, I think it's really good what they've been doing with the two of them. But I think that, at some point, Daniel Bryan's got to step up. He's still, they can now trust, hopefully, his health enough that they can start utilizing him the way they wish they could have all along before he was injured and was forced into an early retirement. I think it's kind of time for that to take place, and then consequently, I think that yes, an AJ Styles Daniel Bryan matchup is going to be great at some point. I think that Daniel Bryan working as the babyface, Samoa Joe working as the heel makes a lot of sense as well. It might not happen this Saturday or this weekend, but I do think Samoa Joe takes the title off of AJ Styles, and I hope that WWE sees the importance of not throwing away these matches, especially title matches and stuff. Hopefully they see the importance of kind of setting the stage early with some of these one-off events and these big events and overseas events, and making people realize that, look, this is still must-see TV. They still need to find a way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here, even though I won't be surprised if I'm wrong. I hope this to my core, and I really think WWE might be thinking along those same lines. So I'm going to say Samoa Joe takes the title from AJ Styles this week. I really think, of course, no disqualification does kind of open it up a lot of times for the babyface to quote unquote steal a victory, Nick. But I'm still going to go out there. I'm going to say Samoa Joe wins in some fashion and takes the title, and we do get one major outcome as far as that goes. Anything else in particular? Becky Lynch retains, I believe. Forgot about even mentioning that one in the championship matches, but I definitely think Becky Lynch
retains.
She is phenomenal. Both of these girls are doing some of their best work I've ever seen, and I hope it continues for a long time to come. Ronda Rousey, it's sad that we're not even really, I almost forgot to even mention her name on this. I think that's kind of
that's a pretty telling sign, man.
Yeah.
Ronda Rousey is, here we are now. We're months later after her debut, and I think what's happening is what we sort of feared might happen, which is that there's really nothing special about Ronda Rousey anymore.
There's not, in a lot of ways, not until they finally start getting past kind of this kind of throwaway stuff to, this transitional stuff they're doing with her. And they're really starting, you can tell in every match now, Nick, she goes on she's on the defensive a lot. It's now getting to the point where she's 100%. She's not coming out and just killing or crushing. They're trying to bring her down a peg, which I think is crucial and necessary in order to kind of elevate every woman that gets to work with her. You can't just have her annihilate everybody. But it does make her lose some of the special qualities that she has, and almost makes it somewhat not believable at the same time. So they really are walking a tightrope with Ronda Rousey in my mind, as far as relevance versus irrelevance, and superstar versus kind of just high level star. And I still think there's going to be big money matches for her, but I'm not sure when and how often. They are definitely going a different route than they have ever taken with a guy like Brock since his UFC days and coming into the picture. But I agree with you. That being said, Nick, the Shield, we'll talk about the final two kind of matches, the Shield versus Braun Strowman, Dolph Ziggler, and Drew McIntyre. And then we'll talk a little bit about Triple H versus The Undertaker and whether or not you think The Undertaker will win this, or like Shawn Michaels said, you take Triple H every day of the week, twice on Sunday.
Starting with the Shield here, I could see this match just ending in just major chaos with these six guys. Obviously, you're building toward Roman Reigns, Braun Strowman at Crown Jewel with that somewhat odd addition of Brock Lesnar in the match. Yeah. I mean, and it feels weird. I mean, obviously, the idea behind it is he's invoking his rematch clause. He gets that title rematch. But it just sort of feels like the train of thought is Braun Strowman versus Roman Reigns, and Brock Lesnar sort of interrupting that. I don't really see a clean finish in this match.
Right.
They really are pushing that idea of one of the two sides, turning on each other, imploding, the Shield imploding, Dean Ambrose, potentially, that idea of the weak link that they're pushing on Raw this week. So you could see something. I'm not going to predict that someone is turning on someone, but I could definitely see something happen where Dean Ambrose inadvertently, through no fault of his own, costs the Shield the match, and that creates more turmoil. Or, you just see some kind of major chaotic DQ finish. So I'm going to go with the sort of chaotic DQ finish where one of the two guys, maybe an Ambrose or maybe Drew McIntyre or Ziggler costs the team, does something to accidentally hit somebody else, or I don't want to say necessarily cost the match, but there's tension. We're left at the end feeling that there is tension amongst the teams. There's tension brewing in the Shield or within Ziggler, McIntyre, and Strowman's side. And then as for Triple H versus The Undertaker, because I feel like the end game here is obviously the tag team match, I'm going to go with, I want to say I'm going to go with The Undertaker here, but we have seen The Undertaker pick up the wins earlier this year, got the big win over Rusev in Saudi Arabia, which could mean that you could see sort of Shawn Michaels. I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that Shawn Michaels and Kane are going to be involved in this match. I don't think they're going to do a DQ finish, though. I don't think they need to. This is not a match, especially because they're billing it as the final match
They've
ever
got to
between
have a
these two
clear
guys.
winner.
I certainly don't think we need to see this thing end in a DQ, and it really doesn't matter who wins or loses. So, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say The Undertaker wins the match. He's really sort of been the baby face in this situation. So I think to send the crowd home happy, I think The Undertaker wins, but it's not without tons of involvement from both Kane and Shawn Michaels, which will then lead to and set up that tag match that'll inevitably happen at WWE Crown Jewel.
And I'll go the opposite direction, even though I agree with you on all the other fronts. I think Triple H wins this for a couple of reasons, but one, they've just pushed the fact that Undertaker's always had his number. It makes more sense that if they're putting this over as kind of a final clash, Triple H still looks great. He could go another 5 years full time if he wanted to. The Undertaker hasn't been able to do that for at least 5 years. I think it really does seem like they're pushing you to believe Triple H wins for that reason, which might be the reason they go in the other direction, because again, this is one of those that's semi-inconsequential, and it doesn't really matter. But I think for that very reason, a guy like The Undertaker probably wants to give Triple H his own, his own way of respecting him by giving him that clean finish, not clean, but finish, victory over himself. And so I really think Triple H wins this. And as far as the others, the other one, I agree with you. I think Dolph Ziggler probably takes a pinfall. So if I'm going to give it to one, I think because the way that it went down, he is being looked at as the weak link. He's the only one that lost this match. And that's, those series of matches one-on-one between these two groups. I think that's probably what's going to end up happening. And while I don't look for like Dean Ambrose to turn anytime soon, as we discussed last week, Nick, I do think the possibility of Dolph Ziggler getting out of the way of Braun Strowman, but more specifically Drew McIntyre, should they even decide to stay together if they get rid of a guy like Dolph. I think getting him out of the way of Drew McIntyre is a goal of WWE's, which it's a little tricky with them having the titles, but that's easily fixed if they want it to be. And so I just think Drew McIntyre has impressed even me. Like I'm blown away by him, but I think he's impressed to such a degree. I think since his return, and I think WWE's ready to start kind of going to that next level with him potentially. And I don't think Dolph is going to be there. I hope that is not the case. I love them as a dynamic duo. I think that Dolph can help Drew McIntyre's career advance while giving himself a little bit more meaning and relevance than he would otherwise have, Nick. But I do think in this case, Dolph, it looks like it could be setting up for something to happen between one of these two groups, and I'm going to say it probably falls on the Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre, Braun Strowman side before it does the Shield. So I'm going to say that they keep adding to that fire, and Dolph Ziggler takes a pinfall or something of some kind by one of the members of the Shield, and the Shield gets a victory. But I do think it's going to be kind of a chaotic match and gets a little crazy, and I'm looking forward to that part of it. I think they've done a good job telling the stories of these two groups, sure. And made for some interesting TV. But at some point, these things are going to have to kind of start breaking up and allowing these guys to move in their own direction We'll have to see, when that's going to happen. But I think it's sooner rather than later for both groups. I just don't think it's going to come at the expense of the Shield. I don't think the Shield splits up as a result of them finally kind of going in their own direction, but it also kind of depends on how quickly they start getting past Braun Strowman and in this picture. That's really the only reason these guys are together, is because otherwise Braun, just fans would not want any other outcome but Braun winning and moving on. So I think it just kind of, it's all dependent on that. But it's going to be an interesting show nonetheless, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about it next week here on The Voice of Wrestling. But in the meantime, since you stuck around this long, stick around a few minutes longer, because right after this, we have an interview Nick conducted with Chris Sabin. It was a good one, and you need to check it out. So we will be right back here on The Voice of Wrestling.
Wrestling fans, you are listening to Ring of Honor star Chris Sabin. I want to shift gears a little bit. When you mention, of course, 2003, I mean, it's hard to believe that's 15 years since you made your Ring of Honor debut, and you've really seen it all. You've spent a long time in Impact Wrestling, of course, former Impact Wrestling champion. There is such a big shift that's going on right now in I want to say, I call it, we talked before maybe independent wrestling, but I now kind of call it non-WWE, because everything is sort of trending upwards. And one of the biggest announcements, that came out of Ring of Honor, maybe in company history, and you can tell me if you agree with this assessment or not, is of course Supercard of Honor alongside New Japan, making the Madison Square Garden debut, selling out that show. What was your reaction to that news when you heard not only that they were doing the show there, but that it sold out?
Yeah, it was jaw-dropping and exciting at the same time. That's, Madison Square Garden, that's something that, no other company has accomplished, running that building except for WWE. Right. WCW never did that, ECW never did that, but Ring of Honor was able to do that. Huge accomplishment, just huge. I mean, that's such a legendary building for wrestling. I have such good memories of wrestling events there. For example, Bret Hart beating Yokozuna for the world title at WrestleMania 10. That happened in that building. To have the chance, hopefully, to be able to wrestle in that building is huge for me. It's just, man, I really hope I'm booked on that show.
If you could, who would be? Give me a dream opponent. Madison Square Garden.
Since it's a dream opponent, there's no limits. They could be anyone. I would say I'd love to wrestle Jay Lethal for the Ring of Honor world title.
World title, absolutely. Have you spoken with what other kind of reactions, did you get to that show? Just what's the buzz like from other wrestlers? Maybe not even necessarily in Ring of Honor or in New Japan, but just in other companies that are seeing such an achievement like this. Is there has there been a kind of a fluid reaction to what's been going on with Ring of Honor lately and MSG?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is just one of the major signs that things are changing in the wrestling business. I think we're on the beginning of this huge upswing, and I think we're in a golden age of wrestling right now, but I think it's at the very beginning of it. I think the next several years are going to be really exciting for wrestling. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think that, that's just one of those signs that things are changing, and they're changing for the better, without a doubt.
And you're someone who, you're one of the few, actually, that as long as you have been in this business, you haven't had that run in WWE. And now with everything changing, we've heard this from other wrestlers who have said, WWE is not necessarily the end-all be-all anymore, and it's not necessarily the place that you have to go to be successful in wrestling. Was WWE ever on your radar earlier on in your career? And now, in light of these shifts that are happening, is it something that you would want to do, or do you look at it and say, hey, this is nothing that I have to do. I want to continue this journey that I'm on right now outside of WWE?
Sure, WW. Well, I will say it because it had a different name when I was growing up, but WWF. That was my motivation for getting into wrestling. I grew up in a small town in southeastern Michigan, and the only wrestling on television was WWE for a long time. Then started watching WCW and stuff and whatnot. But WWE was always my favorite. It was always what I wanted to watch, or what I chose to watch, during the Monday Night Wars. It was always watching Monday Night Raw, then Nitro during the commercials. So yeah, I mean, when I first got into it, that was the goal. That was what I wanted to do. But like you said, things have changed nowadays. It's different. I guess it depends on what your values are and what you want to accomplish nowadays. Like, I mean, if your goal is to be famous, then obviously WWE is the place for you. But if your goal is you can do everything else pretty much besides be famous. You can make a good living, you can have great matches, and you can leave a mark on pro wrestling outside of WWE nowadays. They're not like you said, the end all be all. There's other options out there, and you can make a living outside of there. It does, you don't have to be there anymore, and I think that's cool. So it's great to have options. I think it's great for the wrestlers nowadays. Because now they have options.
Yeah, and speaking of options, we just witnessed sort of another historical event with All In. What was your reaction to the All In event and the success that had?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's one of those things about MSG being sold out. I think that's another sign, and those telltale signs that things are changing in the wrestling world. That's another thing. Whoever would have thought that would have happened, even 3-4 years ago, that, it was unfathomable, that just couldn't happen, but it did happen. MSG being sold out and another company running there, who would have thought that would have happened 3, 4, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? No one would have thought that would happen, and it happened. So yeah, I think that's, All In is just another one of those signs that wrestling is really changing.
If you're someone like a Cody, what do you think? It's an interesting time because, those guys who were involved with All In, their status for ROH at MSG is sort of unknown. Do you see a show like All In and think to yourself, this is something that I'd love to see more of? Because what was amazing to me is that these guys did this whole show without any television build. I mean, there's no weekly television show building to this event. They did it all online. It was all through social media. Do you want to see things continue like that? Or for you, do you think it makes more sense for a wrestler to go, in guys like that case, to go back to a WWE or to go with a WWE?
I think you have to look at whether it was successful or not, and obviously it was extremely successful. They sold out in 30 minutes or something like that. So, why would you want to go back? Why, when you can run a show in a 10,000 seat arena and sell it out? I'm sure that's a lot of money right there, and that's a lot of people. I mean, you're just doing something really important for wrestling and for wrestling fans. So I can't see why you would ever want to not do that again, or not run an All In 2 or an All In 3 or All In 4. As long as it continues to be successful, it just makes sense to do it again.
If you start building some serious momentum, and it looks like you already are after Best of the Super Juniors, what is next for you in terms of, and that's in it. What makes me think of this is, like you said, you have goal, and I've always kind of felt this way. Goals can be whatever is your priority, right? Is it doing what I want to do creatively, like Cody Rhodes said, play your own music? Is it that you have a family you need to provide for, so making the most money is the priority? Is it being famous, and working for that biggest company, which would be WWE? For you right now, what's the priority for as long as you have been in this business? Is it getting to a stage like a WWE? Is it being able to play your own music at an event like an All In? What's the goal for you? What's the future for you after, the Ring of Honor Death Before Dishonor weekend?
It's tough to say, because I kind of feel like that's something that has changed throughout the years, just at different stages in my life, different whatever's going on, or whatever's happening, obviously certain things take priority over other things. Fame definitely isn't one of them. Like, I never really cared about being famous. Just the small amount of fame that I have now, which, it's not, I'm not famous, like, only people that know me are people that are wrestling fans and have followed my career or whatever. I can't imagine what it would be like to be as famous as John Cena. Some people might find that appealing and they would want to go for that. Me, maybe, not so much. I don't really care about the tension. I don't know. I want to be involved in wrestling somehow, and it's just like it's an outlet for me. I love it. It's a passion, and I just feel like whatever's going to happen, the right thing is going to happen as long as I continue to be passionate about it. And I continue to follow that feeling and follow what excites me. I think things will just fall in place naturally. And it might be ended up in the WWE one day, or it might be never going there. I don't know right now. I can't say. But all I know is I'm just going to follow my gut.
Absolutely. One final question before I let you go. Do you think we've seen the last Motor City Machine Guns match?
I don't know. That's really hard to say. I guess it depends if Alex wants to come out of retirement. Obviously when a wrestler retires, he doesn't really retire. That's obvious.
Sure.
No wrestling retirement is real and it lasts. So I think the possibility exists, though. I think it could happen, and hopefully we make something special out of it.
Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me today. Best of luck, of course, in this new endeavor, this newish endeavor in your return to a singles career, and best of luck to you with everything that goes on after that.
Cool. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Guys, you were listening to Ring of Honor superstar Chris Sabin. I am Nick Paglino for Chris Cash. You have been listening to The Voice of Wrestling. We will see you next week.